This is Ryan Hoover. He is the owner and lead instructor of Fit to Fight. Now, when it comes to martial arts, he has quite the extensive background with training from kickboxing to Muay Thai, Jiu-Jitsu, wrestling, Krav Maga, and I'm sure countless other martial arts disciplines. Needless to say, Ryan understands violence, which is exactly what brought me to him in the first place. I traveled down to RKM training in Myrtle Beach, which yes, is home to Icy Mike of Hard to Hurt, but I was there to take the Edge of Reality course ran by Ryan himself. For those that are not familiar with this course, it revolves around knife defense, or just edged weapon defense to begin with, because let's face it, knives aren't the only thing out there that can stab or cut you. Knife defense and just overall knife training is something that I have been personally putting in a lot of time into learning this year for one reason. Well, technically two. One, I wanted to make sure that this year I spent a lot of time growing both as a practitioner and as an instructor, which means that I have to spend a lot of time just learning new things, which also means I have to be training a lot. Second, and more importantly, there seems to be a lot of misconceptions or myths when it comes to knife defense and just knife training as a whole. I figured what better way to break through some of these misconceptions than to dive headfirst into some of these seminars with the best of the best, hence why I took Ryan's course to begin with. Now, the Edge of Reality course consisted of 2 full days of training. Saturday consisted mostly of the technical aspects of fighting, which basically means we slowed everything down so that we could truly and fully understand what exactly we had to do to control the overall situation, again, especially when you're dealing with edge weapons. And this was done through the use of takedowns, grip fighting, grappling, striking, clinch work, head positioning, and just overall all the basic mechanics that you need to, again, control violent situations. Sunday, however, is where we introduced the training knives and we cranked the intensity up and pretty much just went full out through a variety of different situational drills that really put us to the test, both physically and mentally, on just how to handle violent attacks with, again, edge weapons. Now, the beauty of doing seminars like this is you get to work with a variety of training partners, each coming from their own experiences, both real life and also of their own training, different body sizes, different strengths, different weaknesses, which means that I was pretty much able to play around with a variety of techniques and approaches to the situations because I was constantly switching and changing to partners, which means I had to adapt on the fly as it is. So therefore, I took advantage of working with some people that were bigger, some people that were smaller, some people that were better grapplers, some that were better strikers, and I had to adjust my own personal skills in order to find solutions for that specific situation. In other words, I pressure tested the shit out of things to figure out what actually happens in violent knife attacks and to actually break through all the bullshit to figure out what exactly does in fact work, at least for me. As a result, I was able to break through a lot of these misconceptions about just knife training and knife attacks as a whole, and today I'm going to share with you 5 of the ones that I broke through that I find to be the most commonly stated or discussed online, and yes, it usually means that they're coming from somebody that is less trained, or in other words, the internet keyboard masters. Number 1, the knife always starts in the attacker's hand. I don't find this to be true at all, and the only time during any of the training that we actually started with the knife in hand was when we were initially just working like our initial blocks and clears and pass-bys, or when we were initially tying up on grips, again, just to kind of get the repetition down. But once we actually started doing the live training, I would pretty much say every single time the knife started out concealed, because again, majority of the time, by the time you actually do realize that a knife is involved in a fight, you're already being stabbed. If I were to walk into a situation where somebody already had a knife in hand in a threatening motion, I would probably turn right back around and run like hell the complete opposite direction, and I would not choose to engage unless I absolutely had to. But again, most times altercations, you're in each other's face, one person's yelling, you're both yelling, you start striking, maybe you start grappling, and then at some point, one person decides to pull out a blade of some sort and starts attacking you with it. And again, if you watch a lot of knife videos online, that's exactly what happens. And by the time the other individual realizes that a knife is in play, they've already been stabbed multiple times, and they have to deal with it from there. So again, through the actual physical training, that's exactly how we trained, and that's exactly what was happening during pretty much all of the scenarios that we went through. So yeah, knives just aren't just out there in the open like that. They're usually concealed and hidden. Number 2, hand switches. I think that this is more of a training issue rather than an actual live case scenario. And Ryan even went over with us how there was one individual that watched like 170 YouTube videos of different knife attacks, and not once was there any hand switching. I think that this is something that happens, if it does at all, it usually happens in training because I'm just going to be an asshole or an annoyance to my partner and just make them feel like they just completely failed the scenario, because I'm just going to be like, haha, and then I stab you. What happened, and this was from like both sides, if I was the person in the drill that was holding the knife, once the my training partner got a hold of the arm, I clenched that knife as tight as I possibly could because one, I didn't want to accidentally drop it. I was also drastically trying to pull it back into me, but more importantly, I wanted to make sure that there was no way in hell that you were going to rip this knife out of my hand. So, did the thought of hand switching even come to mind? Absolutely not, because I was so focused on just squeezing and trying to bring the knife back to me so then I can continue attacking you. I never once even considered hand switching. Plus, it's risky because if I was holding this knife and I risk opening to switch, there's a very good chance that the knife's going to fall out or you're going to see that and smack my hand down or something, but I have a greater risk of losing the knife altogether than just trying to do a quick hand switch. On the other side, when I was the one controlling the attacking arm, my job was to make sure that I applied enough pressure and proper positioning to where even if you wanted to hand switch, you physically couldn't because of the pressure or just because of the distance between the two arms. I pretty much just never gave you the opportunity to where you could even consider hand switching to begin with. So yeah, hand switches, not happening. Number 3, blocking and punching at the same time. In theory, this is a great idea because you're essentially killing two birds with one stone. You're defending the knife while also striking and potentially ending the fight at the same time. Live case scenario, most likely not going to happen. There's already too much going on. Your mind is already split into a million directions. Again, we talk about the idea of by the time you realize the knife is in play, you either don't realize it until you're stabbed, or you have milliseconds to respond, which means that by the time your brain is processing everything, your focus at that point should 100% be on controlling the arm, not trying to now split your thought process into two completely different types of motions, but it's just too difficult. You're risking the opportunity of that person actually landing a strike with that knife compared to if I 100% put my focus on that knife. And keep in mind, they're probably not striking and stabbing you at the same time. If anything, they might post on you, they might push you, they might grab you, but the knife, again, is the bigger threat. That's what we should be putting our focus on. If once you get control, should we start utilizing strikes? Absolutely, and you have the whole body to do so. You can use your head, you can use your shoulders, you can use your elbows, fists, knees, kicks, so you have a vast majority of strikes that you can use, which again, if you have experience in different disciplines, that definitely comes into play like this. Just like Ryan, he showed us a lot of different ways to set up elbow strikes, headbutts, takedowns, like countless different options just simply because of his experiences. Now, he did go over about like accidental strikes, meaning that if I'm going in for a 2-on-1 grip to control the knife and I drive my head forward in the same time and I just happen to headbutt you in the process, that's a bonus. But I'm not going for the headbutt, I'm going for the control, but I'm just forcing my head in that direction. Same thing with like punching. We worked one scenario where you had to block the knife with one hand while reaching behind and grabbing with the backhand, essentially just going right for a 2-on-1 grip. However, in the process, if you manage to graze your attacker on the way through, awesome, you got a bonus shot, but we're not aiming for that punch right away. We're just reaching, and if we get the strike, we get the strike. I will tell you this, though. Very few times did I actually even remember to strike my attacker in the first place when we were training because I was so focused on body positioning, I was so focused on controlling them while also controlling the attacking arm and just controlling the overall situation that by the time I got to a point where I could have thrown strikes, it was already too late. Like, it was done for, the fight was done at that point, and I'd be like, oh shit, I could have just headbutted you, I could have punched you ages ago, but you're just not thinking about it at the time. So if I'm not even thinking about striking you when I have an opportunity to strike you, then I'm damn well not going to remember to split my focus into two completely different motions, different directions, different everything. Focus on control first, focus on strike second. Number 4, immediately disarm your attacker. This one's just kind of like disarms in general, right? I've taken 2 different knife seminars this year. One ran by Aaron Giannetti, one ran by Ryan Hoover, and I've yet to learn a single proper disarm. Why? Because it's not something that I think you should be focusing on in these types of scenarios. Like, if you want to drill some, sure, but the bulk of your training should be focused on control and isolation, utilizing strikes when possible. But instead, as Ryan mentioned, we should just hope that there is an accidental disarm somewhere in the process of it. If I have a 2-on-1 Russian tie, and I've got your arm completely isolated, you can't pull it back, again, you're not even thinking about hand switching. If I am to release one hand with the idea that I'm going to smack or punch your palm to drop that knife while you're full forcing trying to pull your arm back, there's a very good chance that the moment I release that hand, you're getting that arm back, which means it's now coming right back as a stab. I would much rather maintain that grip and I either let go to get a better grip, essentially like if I'm climbing the body or maybe going for a lapel or something, or I'm going to release that hand to throw a strike because I see clear opportunity, and I'm going to bank on the fact that that strike is either going to cause you to drop the knife or that strike's going to knock you out and end the fight, but it's worth the risk at that point. But if I'm just going to let go and start smacking your hand with the intent that it's going to work, again, we talked about this a couple points ago. If I'm holding the knife, I'm clenching that thing like there's no tomorrow. There's no way in hell you're going to be able to disarm this easily again, especially under pressure. The accidental disarm idea is just the fact that if in the process, again, if I'm changing grips, if I'm throwing strikes, if I'm transitioning from a Russian tie down to a takedown, if in that process you drop the knife or it happens to fall out of your hand, that's an accidental disarm. We talk about how if you're taking the person down, they have to choose, am I going to hold on to the knife and just smack my palm into the concrete, or am I going to let go and brace myself and hopefully catch myself so that I don't eat the concrete? Most guys are going to let go of the knife and catch themselves, which is exactly what happened in training. There was no disarms that were used. There was no disarms that were necessary. If you isolated and controlled your attacker properly, and I was able to pin their arm with my shin or get to a good grappling position where I essentially just had them tied up, I didn't need to disarm the weapon. Plus, why would I want to potentially risk disarming it and having it bounce off into the crowd somewhere where maybe one of their buddies can pick it up and then come and stab me in the back? So again, focus on control and isolation. If there's an accidental disarm, awesome, but we're not hunting for them. Last but not least, and there's a couple different names for this one, just shoot them. It's called the Second Amendment, or my favorite one, Glock Fu. They all mean the same thing. Basically, I have a gun strapped to my waist. I don't need to learn self-defense because I'm just going to shoot them. Here's my philosophy on this, okay? If you feel the need to carry a firearm because of whatever reason, safety, protection, someone attacks you, then you should be taking the proper training to ensure that you can protect yourself even without said firearm. More importantly, you should be taking the hands-on training so you know how to properly deploy said firearm in case someone does come at you and is punching you in the face, grabbing you, pulling out a weapon of their own. Because let me tell you something, under stressful situations like that, when tensions are high, and you don't train like that on a regular basis, your body's not going to react the way that you think it does. Again, knife attacks happen fast and oftentimes without warning, which means that even if you are trained and you can draw your weapon fast enough, if you don't know the signs and body language to look for, such as like the high-pitch elbow, by the time you realize the knife is in play, again, you're being stabbed, which means you don't have time to draw your weapon. Now, even though this was a knife-specific seminar, Ryan allowed us to work different ways on which we could successfully create space to then draw our weapon if needed. However, what we found is that a lot of times we actually had to engage with our attacker in order to then successfully create space, especially when you're in like that awkward space distance of like, I'm not 1 foot away, but I'm not 10 feet away. We're kind of like in that between period where I could try to draw, but there's a very good chance you're going to stab me in the process. So instead, I'm going to close the distance, throw some strikes, tie up with you a little bit, try and take you down maybe just kind of disorient you and push you away. Either which way, I'm trying to create space safely so that I could draw my weapon, and by the time you turn around and figure out where I am, I've already gotten my shots off and we're good. Or I get you pinned down to the ground in a position that I could draw my weapon and just use it as a means of stop, and if something proceeds from there, again, I can get the shots off accordingly. But again, for someone that's also just kind of getting into more of the firearms training, it was good to see what actually needs to be done in order to successfully create space, because it's not as simple as just shooting down range at a piece of paper with perfect lighting and perfect weather conditions, because in the real world, when someone's in your face trying to kill you, it's not just an easy shot. You have to deal with a lot of different stress, emotions, mental, physical variables that you can't train for down on a range. So just shoot them is probably the worst piece of advice that you can give anybody. And instead, again, I would highly recommend that you just go and train and just learn hands-on exactly what it takes to protect yourself from a physical perspective. Now again, just understand, these are my own personal findings from my own personal training. We all have different experiences, we all have different strengths and weaknesses, so it's up to you to figure out what works best for you in these types of situations, which means, again, you have to go train. So I suggest you do what I've been doing and invest the time in yourself to learn stuff online, pressure test it, find the proper instructors, take their classes, seek advice. But again, at the end of the day, you have to test everything that you see. everything that you learn, everything that you see, everything that you hear, you have to test it for yourself to really figure out what does in fact work, but also what works for you. And just remember, never draw any conclusions about what you read. Like I said, there's a lot of misconceptions and myths about knife fighting, so I made sure that during both Aaron's seminar and Ryan's seminar that I was kind of going outside of my comfort zone and trying different things just to really see what works, but I was also watching a lot of the other people training to see what they were actually doing, because again, it's behavior, and I want to see what they're doing in different situations, and my conclusions were pretty much still the same. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed this video. I am looking to do a little bit more knife-based and just weapon-based content, at least in the coming weeks, so hopefully you enjoyed it, and if you did, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and just keep your eyes out for the next one. Stay safe.